Good morning, Dr. Robert Sands. How are you today?
I'm good. Good morning, Diane.
Excellent. We're going to dive straight in, and I want to just say to my followers who are astrology minded, we've been Dr. Robert Sands and I have been matching our diaries up, and I don't think it's any mistake. Here we are on a super moon, a blue moon, and we are talking about women today. And obviously, those of you who are into astrology know that the moon relates to women, and it rules the sign of Cancer, about caring, nurturing, loving energy, highly protective energy. And also the moon relates to the mind, how we use our mind, how we react to things. And with all that said, Dr. Robert Sands, I would like to pick your enormous brain and get you to tell me about your experience of working with women over the years, and specifically regarding mother-daughter relationships. I believe it's called something, might not be quite, the Electra complex, about the competitiveness that women have and girls have, and in my life, we have the kind of idea what the circles are moving, that it's the sisterhood, and women should be supporting women, and women should be there for other women, and when it works brilliantly. But boy, when the dark Kali goddess comes out of women and they find themselves not supporting other women and actually doing the opposite, and kind of seeking to destroy and to undermine their fellow women right from an early age. Tell me what you've experienced regarding the competitiveness of women and daughters and mothers over the years.
Well, let's start, if we're going to have a discussion, and these are just inventive discussions that we're having, so let me invent some thoughts. Here they come. Girls and women are human, boys and men are human, so they both have shadow. They both, the boys are snakes and snails and puppy dog tails, and girls are sugar and spice and everything nice, but we know that's not always true. So there are differences and similarities, and so the shadow, you're commenting on the lack of uniform love and support, that there's some ugliness can pop out of groups, and I would say that's human, because it occurs in mixed groups, it occurs in male groups. Competitiveness, rivalry, competition, ego, there's all these words we use to describe that. But really the beginning, I'll say this in all sincerity, because I'm in a profession that has always honored mothers. Mothers are really the source of all life in a concrete sense, but also in the sense that without the mother instincts, and I'm watching it even with animals. We have puppies in the house, and the mother is basically surrendering her interests to the puppies, and human mothers surrender their interests and desires to their children, sometimes in a dramatic and puzzling way. You see a powerful, maybe career-driven woman discover the humility of birth, and the wonder of a child will bring you into a completely different state. It's amazing. It's something very primal and maybe godlike. I don't know. That may be too far. So
goddess-like. We'll have that. Goddess-like.
Goddess-like. All right, goddess-like. So again, back to basics. Children are born, the mothers surrender themselves to a certain extent, not totally, but you have to maintain yourself in life. but the child then becomes the focus of all the love and concern. And the parents, ideally both parents, then surrender their interests and invest them in the child, and an attachment forms. And you see the adoration between the mother and the child, the nurturing, the breastfeeding. It's all really something to behold. It should be revered, and it is revered. And then, of course, the child from this dependent state starts to become an individual, and they develop their own mind. And, you can call that individuation, emancipation. It happens toddlerhood, 3 or 4 years old, and so on and so forth, up the ladder as the ladder. So if your question is about competitiveness, you don't really see it in infants. Infants are not competitive, they're adoring. Toddlers start to get surly and push back. Even in breastfeeding, for example, one way to wean a baby is when they start biting. That's it. That's when they lose the benefits. And so they're moving on, which is appropriate. So you may say, well, when does this competitiveness begin? And it may have something to do with what used to be called the Oedipus complex, which is really the love of the mother. Both the male child and the female child love the mother as the first love object. Everyone adores their mother if they're lucky to have one available to adore. And there definitely are human beings who don't have the benefit of that. But let's stay with the discussion of the common and ideal situation where the mother is the center of the universe. The little boy loves his mother. The little girl loves her mother. And the two trajectories differ. So the boy later on learns to love another female. So he carries that primal attraction or love or admiration onto another stage of life. Whereas the girl has to shift her love to, if she's going to be heterosexual or male attracted, has to move that love away from the mother and shift it over onto the father or an available male object if she's going to learn to love that way. And so you can see that there's differences in the trajectory of the boy and the girl. And I think that's a part of why the female daughter relationship can be difficult, because of this love attraction, but also the need to emancipate, the need to be oneself. Little girls have egos, and they have desires, and they have plans, and they have fantasies, and they also generally find love interest in a father or an uncle, where a new type of love feeling will develop, and yet they remain primarily loving of their mother, if to the extent the relationship was primarily loving. But we know in real relationships are not 90% love. They're full of conflict, they're full of disappointment. The mother is not always ideally there for the child, and the child is frustrated. And so there's hatred, children hate, they wish their parents dead, all these extreme emotions. And that happens both in boys and girls. But I think the problem of girls is complicated by the fact that they love their mother primarily, and they sometimes have difficulty moving on to heterosexual love, because it requires a shift away from this primal choice. And that's called the Oedipal. That's an aspect of the Oedipus complex that is different for girls than boys.
And what is the difference between that and the Electra complex?
I think the Electra is, I'm not sure. I think I'm not up to date on that. It's familiar, and I should know that. I think that's a part of the female Oedipal complex. Can you tell me what the Electra, that's a Greek
It's a,
Electra.
I think it's, if I'm just overviewing it, it's where you get that competitiveness between, say, mother and daughter, obviously incredibly subconscious, unconscious, for the males in normally the father figure. And obviously where the mother and the husband and wife are obviously in this relationship, and then the daughter you know, kind of seeks to have that, even that love which goes beyond the, obviously the natural kind of just normal thing. And obviously it's all very unconscious, but it causes,
Right.
it drives that kind of jealousy and that kind of strange, probably the female daughter doesn't even understand herself, so that kind of stuff.
Right. It's not conceptualized, but it's acted out, and it's an emotional rivalry that where the little girl that's primarily enthralled with the mother and with the mother then she shifts her attention to the father, and a competition occurs.
Mm.
And if the mother sees this as a threat, then it creates a problem, because the little girl is seen as preferring the other parent. But actually, I think a healthy mother is happy with that and is not threatened by it. So the girl's love interest, if we could call it love interest, can flow to the father, and it is not a competitive situation, but it commonly is, because it's and this is, I think, caused by the way that the father handles it. That if the father becomes excessively preoccupied with the love interest of his little girl, then the mother sees a rivalry that his interest is leaving her and now flowing to the child. And of course, this can happen with the so-called devouring mother Oedipus complexes, when the mother and the son are intertwined, and she gives her love and attention to the son, and the father is looking at that and saying, what has happened here? I've lost my wife, she's in love with my son.
Absolutely.
And there's a rivalry developed, you know, and of course the old classic formulation of that is that the boy child who loves his mother and wants to marry his mother is threatening the father if the father responds. So this is where the adult response is really key, not the child. The child is just being a child, and their love flows wherever it goes. And the little girl loves her father, and the mother kind of winks at that and says, oh, isn't that great? But if she feels threatened, then that's a problem. Or if the father does become over involved, let's say, it's like too much of a good thing. If you're over involved with your daughter and you neglect maybe your son and your wife, that's a problem. And that's, I think, where the rivalry and the jealousy and insecurity are fed by the leadership of the parent. So I would put it on the parents and say the children are just kind of following a kind of a natural course.
And what's quite interesting, I had a chat the other day, and it was about tone of voice and how you can speak to your pets, and how pets can do anything and you won't get annoyed with them. But if your significant other did something similar, you would. It's like, why is it the pet never riles you or never gets you, you know, kind of, you know, and yet if your partner did the same thing, you'd be, oh, for goodness sake, you know, but your pet gets, oh, it's okay, sweetheart. And it's a bit like kids, isn't it? It's like, yeah. And I think sometimes if you've got children and, you know, there's that, it's something as simple as a tone of voice, isn't it? It doesn't have to be how it's said, what is said, but it's the how it's said, or the touch, or the roll of the eyes, where the pet or the child just gets complete and unconditional acceptance, which most people crave. I don't know, most humans crave.
So there's kind of a joke I've heard, or a comment that I've heard over and over, is usually by men who say, I want my wife to talk to me the way she talks to the dog. So the pets do get the pets are more loved. There's not as much ambivalence and conflict with
Yeah,
pets, maybe because they're more cooperative, or I don't know. It's very true that pets are treated and talked to in a more consistently loving way than
yeah,
human relationships, which are fraught with disappointment and
yeah,
rivalry and
yeah,
jealousy, and
yeah.
the whole range of human
Well, I've got a
experience.
few things that came up that I wrote down while you were talking. Um, and here's a few of them. So, okay, what order shall I do them in? One thing right at the beginning that you were saying about men and, groups of men and groups of women and, when groups are working at their best. I don't think men I don't really like the word bitchy, but, it people understand it. Men don't seem to be bitchy where they don't seem to, talk about each other behind their backs. They're just kind of more I don't know, more simplistic in a very complimentary kind of way, and I mean that. Whereas women always seem to be analysing and kind of, working out what does that mean? Does it mean anything or nothing? Or do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, the research says that women have more negative emotion, period.
Really?
And that's theorized to be because if you're kind of fearful or negative, you're scanning the environment for danger. It's more adaptive. So
Okay.
the theory would be that women are
Wow.
kind of wired that way because they're and I'll say this, not to go too far with this comparison of dogs and humans, but the female dog we have has a dramatically different behavior. She's very guarded and fearful. She barks when she hears noises. So I think there's something that has to do with having babies and the insecurity and vulnerability of that brings out, and then it carries forward. But it is that men can have negative emotion too. So you don't want to make it sound like
Yeah.
there's dramatic differences, but there
Yeah.
are average differences. Women have more negative emotion, and that
Wow.
probably contributes to some of this, what you're calling bitchiness or
Mm.
negative talk,
That's
that
interesting. I've never
that
heard that.
maybe it shows up in women's work groups. I've always thought it shows up in all work groups, but
Mm.
maybe that's because they're mixed. There's men and women. Men have rivalries. They each have their agendas.
Mm.
They're trying to push for what they want. They're advocates. I mean, I see plenty of that. So I'm not sure. You're saying that that's your impression, that that's a distinct difference between men and women in groups.
I think you have to, as you know, I've worked with women my entire life, all women environments. So that's been my kind of, uh, oh, have you gone? Where did you go? Let's have a look. Where's he gone there? Oh, I'll just talk about among myself. I will actually carry on with this because I have worked with women my entire life in the health spa industry, in relaxation, in my own business, mostly women. And I think the key is to nip things in the bud and compliment women, compliment your team that you're working with, compliment the women that you work with, look for their positive, look for something that you can enjoy and like about them. I always find that has worked very well, and it sends a message to people that you're looking for the good in people, and we all have our dark side, as Dr. Roberts said. We all have our dark side, and yes, it's easy to poke what isn't perfect or what you don't like about people, but I always find it very useful to go and find what you do like about them and what you will warm to and what you enjoy, and just focus on that. Okay, we're back. We had a little technical glitch, which has been all sorted, and we're back in the flow. And I have the questions carrying on, Dr. Robert Sands, about, we were just talking about women, and that very interesting thing I find of women being like, the research shows that women are more negative thinkers. And you were saying that obviously women are always looking out for danger or threat, and therefore they can see what isn't, what could possibly go wrong, which is one way of looking at it. But what I wanted to ask you about mother-daughter relationships, or those relationships between children and parents, whether it's the male or the female parent, the mother or the father, is, tell me, what do you think about what happens psychologically to a child and the parents and relationship if the child is sleeping in the bed of the parents? Some parents say that the child is such a fractious sleeper, they just put the child in the bed and the child can basically sometimes never leave. And you've got like I don't know, 7, 8-year-old, 9, 10-year-old child sleeping in the bed with the parent. What does that do to the dynamics of these kinds of issues we're talking about?
Well, of course, you'd have to look at it at different ages, because babies are enmeshed. The word enmeshment comes to mind. That is normative, desirable, the enmeshment of the mother and the infant sleeping together. Not that you want them rolling over on the infant, but it's common that the child and the mother are together almost constantly. Then the child grows and they begin to discover their own existence and separate and individuate. That's the developmental term, separation, individuation. Can look up books about that. And so there's a drive in the child to move away and to say no and to do their own thing. And so they naturally move away from the mother. Now, this also intersects with the role of breastfeeding, which is a highly attractive. The child is attracted to the mother and the body of the mother and the breast. And then weaning takes place, frequently triggered by biting, which is not a positive thing for the mother. And so there's a struggle or a dance between the child and the mother that leads the child away. There are things that can pull the child to the mother, including attachment style. Some children are imbued with a high attachment, so they're highly attached. They watch the mother. If the mother leaves the room, they become distressed. So you'd call that an attachment behavior that says, well, the child is going to be particularly attracted or drawn to the mother, that may interfere with emancipation. So emancipation is something we want. We all need it. And you're walking a child in age from 1, 2, 3, 4, school age. And then there's another emancipation landmark when the child first goes to preschool or to a babysitter, and they're discovering themselves in the world and so on. You're moving along a developmental line. So the issue of sleeping usually is settled in the toddler years or school, early elementary years, where the child wants to come into the parent's bed. They may have had that encouraged or allowed. And then the parents discover that they really don't like that. And so there's a power struggle getting the child to go to their own bed. And of course, some people live all in one room. You think about humanity, a lot of humanity lives all together in one room.
Absolutely.
And so everybody's kind of sleeping with everybody else. And that's what you'd call that a cultural difference that would make sleeping with the parent more normative. I think in Western culture, the ideal is that the child goes to their own bed by age 4 or 5, maybe 3. If you're kind of on top of it, you can get them used to sleeping in their own bed and work that out. So later on, I guess your question is, when is it a problem? Maybe if you think of a 9-year-old still sleeping with the parent, one parent or the other, then I would say that that's a concern. That's a concern that there's something the parent is enabling or allowing, or there's something in the child that is preoccupied with pursuing that soothing kind of enmeshed time. So is it a problem at age 3? No. Is it a problem at age 5? Maybe. Problem at age 8? Yes, I'd say so. Problem at age 9 or 10? Definitely. Where we really want the child to be out on their own and experiencing themselves without that close attachment, even though there may be yearnings or fantasies in the child about that. You never really forget that primal love, that primal connection, which is kind of with, it's theoretically, it's with us. We carry it with us and we layer it over as we move out into the world. So I'm not sure what else to say about that.
Well, do you think at any point, or at what point, a child becomes, do they ever become aware that, you know, they've got their mother on one side, the father on the other side, and do they become aware that it's kind of abnormal, do you think? Or for the child, as you've often said, being born narcissists, hopefully they've worked their way through it. Do you think there's ever an awareness that there's a conscious understanding, that they're causing a disrupt? Do you think they ever do, or is it all unconscious?
Well, I think the child would detect the parental discomfort and would notice it and respond to it because they don't want to be out of sorts with the parent. So I think the leadership for the change comes from the parent. If the parent is encouraging or enabling, then the child themselves might start to develop a sense by comparison to others. You know, kids, their intelligence develops and they start noticing the world. They talk to their friends. So if you're talking about let's say a 6th grade child, they wouldn't typically have a conversation with a peer about, oh, do you sleep with your mom or your dad, you know, but they would be aware of what's appropriate and inappropriate. But if the parents don't set boundaries and encourage the child to move out into their own domain, then it's less likely that the child would see it as abnormal. They would probably feel that that's okay. To a point. And then, of course, by the time they're in middle school, if they're still sleeping with their parents, that would probably show up in other behavior or other issues that would suggest the child is not really emancipating in an ideal way.
Okay. Because I would imagine, I've not obviously been in this situation, and it's my, as you know, fantastical imagination that I can only kind of relate to. But I can only imagine if I was in bed with my dear beloved and there's a child in between us and the natural sap of passion rises, I could imagine there's some deep resentment that could possibly arise from either parent, probably, that there's this sexual kind of impossibility. And then obviously I can only imagine if parents leave it too long, if the child's in the bed at 8 or 9, to try and then get it out, it's like you kind of, the ship has sailed, you know, you've now made a rod for your own back here.
Yeah.
But I can only imagine I would feel quite resentful if my own child was stopping me getting the passion that I sought. Would you agree? From
Oh,
both
yeah.
sides?
I think that's probably the basis for ejecting the child from the parental bed is
Absolutely.
exactly that.
Yeah.
And it's good. That's a good
Yeah.
fact that that occurs. I guess you could say resentment or discomfort. It would probably begin with a discomfort that this is interfering. A weak comparison would be dogs that sleep in the bedroom can interfere with, they jump up on the bed and people allow that. So it really gets into protecting what's important. And
Yeah.
what's important is the parental nest or the to preserve that primacy. Unfortunately, or in reality, I don't know about unfortunately, but in reality, the child does come between the parents in a variety of ways. And so there is a threat to the parental bond, especially if this is really defined in research by how the father responds to the rivalry of the child.
Okay.
The father observes the mother being in love with the child in a way that he really can't compete with. It's quite amazing and awesome. And if the father admires that and supports it and protects it, that is ideal. But many men resent it. They resent the competition. And you might say that's the beginning of the Oedipal, so-called Oedipal struggle about rivalry for attention and affection from one parent or another. So you're right about these things begin with discomfort or resentment, and the parents need to talk and deal with it. And usually there's maybe a 6-month struggle with the child coming back to the parental bed, and the child is put back in their own bed, and then they need a drink of water, and there's a kind of a ritual that gradually allows them to become comfortable in their own space. So you're right. I mean, you're onto something with this development of the child and how it begins enmeshed with the parent, and then how they move out and start to emancipate, which the parents should support and encourage, and even if need be, deal with it firmly, that you carry the child to their bedroom and say, you're sleeping here. And the child cries, but they have to work that out. You can't accommodate. You don't want to believe that you have to accommodate to every child's whimper or distress. They need to work things out on their own.
And it's almost as if that is the so there's two things I want to say. Going back to sleeping in the bed, I can also, I know actually women that have almost wanted the child in the bed because it gives them the perfect excuse not to have sex. It's like, great, stay here, which is also terrible because, again, there's an unconscious thing that you're using this child as a kind of, like a barricade. It's like, and I'm sure, how they say kids pick up stuff, and it's like, okay, well, here we go. But going back to some of the stuff you said before, it's like when this simple thing of sleeping in their own bed is the like the ripping up away from or just separating that narcissistic trend of wanting everything whenever you can get it, however you can get it, to now you're almost not controlling everyone. You're now in your own bed and you're staying there. And it's that probably that first, not first, because there's lots of things, as you say, that go on where they have to realize that they're not calling all the shots and they're not, the machine. They are a cog in the machine, they're not it. And therefore all that complex dynamic kicks in, doesn't it? It's all kind of between, and if you've got 2 kids or 3 kids, I mean, it's where, I mean, I've also known a lot, like you said just now, men that seeing that bond between the child and the mother, that's when they go off and have affairs. That's when it's just like, okay, you know, I want some of that, you know. And then there's a whole kind of thing about a man wanting to be loved like a child, you know. And you know, I'm not just saying it's just the man, because everyone seeks that intense love, but I've known that a lot, that the men just go, okay, well, I'm out the picture now. They've had my sperm, they've got the child they always wanted, and now I am kind of, you know, kind of. And women, it's kind of, I suppose, hard for women, because they're trying to obviously nurture a child and then try and nurture the need in the man, and it's I don't know how people do it. You know, it's quite a thing, especially if you've got a few kids. It's like, oh wow, it's quite an ask, isn't it?
Well, I mean, what you're describing is very common, maybe even universal, and how it gets handled is really determines the outcome of the child's experience in a family. And of course, the mother might be enthralled or in love, which is good, but also aware of other functions and roles that need to be protected. So life is juggling. Of course, the child being a primal narcissist, and we all came from primal narcissism, where we didn't know anything except our own sensations and desires. And then gradually we discover there's a world as our perceptual ability improves. And then we start thinking and realizing the emergence from narcissism is everyone's path. We all begin as primal narcissists, and then you outgrow it by discovering relationships. And the most important one is the relationship with the mother, where the mother provides the child the experience of discovering other. In other words, the child thinks everything is in their world, and then the mother says no, or the mother walks away, and oh my gosh, the child starts to discover the world, and the world is not the world of the narcissist. So, and then you move on, and of course, later, the narcissism of the child, it develops. It has a developmental line. It goes from one stage to the next. And later on, probably the most important catapult out of narcissism is having a child yourself, falling in love, so you discover other, that helps you move out of your egocentricity or narcissism, if you want to stay with that word, but it used to be just called self-centeredness or egocentricity. So this is all happening all the time in every family, and the parents either help it, or in using the child to meet their own needs, which is another. We have to be careful here not to condemn that, because if the child is meeting a need, that's a part of what motivates the parent to care for the child, is that some need is being met. So we don't want to judge it as inappropriate. And it's also very common for parents to project their own agendas onto the child, their wish fulfillment. Fathers project onto the male children all sorts of fantasies that they were not able to fulfill. This is all very common. And then, of course, what they encounter, what the father encounters as the male child grows, is the discovery that it's an individual apart from themselves, and that the child has their own will and their own talent, and they're not going to be told what to do. There's a lot of literature and film about the struggle between father and son, and also a lot about the struggle between the mother and daughter. And they're similar but different. You know, the girls tend to be more identified with the mother. They're usually closer, although the relationship can be checkered or problematic. Every variety of emancipation story has been told, from easy, and you might even say the role of the father is to help the child get away from the mother, that the mother wants to keep the child for her own instinctual purposes, and the role of the father is to show the child the way into the world, and that frequently there's resentment about that and rivalry. I think you're getting how complex a dance it is between the child and the parents. I guess we could call them dynamics. These are called psychodynamics or Oedipal dynamics or rivalry, sibling rivalry. I mean, there's a long list of observations about
because
children.
that's another thing. It's the, I mean, what two things that comes up here is it's unless you're committed to doing your own personal development work, it seems to be a lifelong thing. It can be between a mother and daughter, or you know, father and son. It just seems to go on and on and on. This kind of, like you say, this dance of, you know, the control, or, you know, the whole the envy, the you know, that antler clashing with men, you know, that kind of seeking the prime warrior spot, or what, however one would call it. And then I don't know quite for the mother, you know, the I don't know, the prime, you know, the prime kind of matriarch, and it's fascinating. But just, what was the other one I was going to say? Oh yeah, the other one was about siblings, like you say, because you can also get, can't you, the super dynamic of, you know, the sibling rivalry, like you just said. Rivalry for the affection, more affection, or who knows what, from the mother or the father, and between themselves. And it really, you have to give awards out, don't you, for every parent. Every, you know, it's just like, I just don't know. It's like, it's so complex to try and that thing you said quite a few videos ago, because we were asking about you know, different kids and how they, even though you parent them the same, they come out different. And that thing that you said to me, which was really brilliant, about but they're not the same parents. They're not parenting the same. They're not the same. They've learned so much, and the child is, you know, it's a completely different setup. It's a completely unique, original parenting experience because of who they are and the nature of the child and stuff. But the complexity of it. And then people have to go to work full time and think about their house and their car and their animals and the pets and eating and paying tax and everything else. So it's like, oh my goodness. But I just want to go off topic a little bit, because I came across this week one of my suggestions on YouTube. This video came up, and it was that Gabor Mate, that guy, that the psychology doctor. Anyway, he talks about psychology and illness, and he was saying about how where it's been proved that I think I said this already, didn't I? Take ALS, and 80% of women are ALS sufferers, and 20% are men. And he was going on about women and how the most great thing women can do is learn to say no. But one thing he said that really struck me, and I really wanted to ask you about it, was in this video I watched, he was saying children need basically two things as they grow up. And I thought, well, you know, you can look at different psychological approaches, and kids need a plethora of things. But he was saying the first thing is to be, you know, to have attention, as in to be fed, to be watered, to be dressed, to have love, you know, all that. So he kind of put that all into one little bit. And the second thing he said, which I thought to myself, I don't think any child has a childhood like that. And that is why we all have these complex things. He said, children need to be able to express their authenticity. It's a really important part of development, that they can express their authenticity. And then I thought to myself, I thought about my own childhood, and I thought about, you know, and because he was saying, you know, children need to feel they can be themselves. I don't know one child. I don't think I could speak to anyone who was allowed to be authentic as a child, unless you have these modern day Waldorf teaching where kids can go wild all day long and just express themselves freely and do whatever. And I don't know where that I don't know where that leads to, you know, to just go, you know, I was always told, don't be loud, don't do this, don't do the other, you know, that whole kind of very conditioned and definitely not allowed to be your authentic self. Don't be loud, don't squeal. What do you think about that?
Well, let's see, authenticity, real self, true self, self-identification, it all sounds like they're of the same pool of ideas, that the child, it has a true or authentic self and they know what it is and we need to let it be. This is the popular culture that everybody gets to be who they say they are, rather than what I derived from my exposure to child development is the child doesn't know who they are. They don't have a concept of who they are. They do express themselves. I mean, kids are authentic when they cry. They're authentic when they're angry. But just because they're expressing themselves doesn't mean that I have to go along with it. I mean, that would be abandonment. I think that if you start to worship at the altar of child authenticity and you have to let them be themselves, then you don't provide socialization. You would always be accommodating to the child's idea of who they are and what they feel and what they want, which is one way to entrain narcissism, is to believe. First, you would believe that the child must be worshipped and what they want granted. And I believe the opposite. I think that you can honor a child and let them have their feelings, but you provide an environment, a holding environment that's derived from wisdom, that knows that this is a transient state. I mean, the idea that there's some authentic child that needs to be allowed to express is sort of true, because we do have a temperament and we do want to have a voice. So I'm not saying impose on yourself your will to crush the child's spirit. That's not the idea, but you have to provide
structure, and you have to provide, you know, the whole oh, I know that'll be his that'll be his technical glitch coming back, but we'll leave it there. I've got so much, as you know, I could always talk for England, as they say, about it. But that idea of, you know, not indulging, I won't say that, but, you know, authenticity, but you have to have a structure, don't you? You have to have kids that have structure. Otherwise, you know, they'll eat, what will they eat all day? I don't know, candy and sweets and toffees. It's like, maybe I'm just projecting my own desires, what I might have done as a kid. Anyway, we'll leave it there, obviously. Dr. Robert Sands has obviously got that little technical glitch going on. So thank you so much for watching. We'll be back soon with another eye-opening. If you've got any questions for Dr. Robert Sands, please do leave them under the video, and I know he will be delighted to answer any of your questions. So thank you so much, and be seeing you soon. Take care now. Bye.